In previous videos, we explored mysterious theories like the gap theory, the two creations account, and the war in heaven. But all these fragments still feel disjointed, like pieces of a puzzle that don't quite fit. What if we could align these pieces in chronological order? What if we could reconstruct the first world that God created? A world that existed before Adam was ever formed from the dust of the ground. In this video, we're going to try and do just that. Not to distort scripture, not to invent a fantasy, but to take what is written in the Bible, what is hinted at in ancient texts, and what is speculated upon in old theories to recreate a lost world. The pre-Adamic world, a world that may have existed in the distant past, shrouded in mystery, with only faint traces left behind, like whispers echoing through eternity. But what was that world like before Adam appeared? Who were the first rulers? Who were the sons of God? What role did the Watchers play, and Lucifer, once known as the morning star? How did he reign over this kingdom of light before his fall? These questions will guide us on a journey through an ancient reality where light and darkness coexisted, a world that existed before Eden and before mankind as we know it. If you're ready to uncover the secrets of that first world, hit the like button to support the channel. Subscribe to Sacred Wisdom for more biblical mysteries and untold stories that challenge everything we thought we knew. And leave a comment below. Do you believe that a pre-Adamic world existed? Let's dive into this forgotten world together. Before Adam was ever formed, before the dust was shaped into human form, there was a world that many believe may have existed. It was a world where the boundaries between heaven and earth were not yet established, where the spiritual and physical realms intertwined seamlessly. This was the first creation, a realm that pulsed with divine light, ruled by beings of glory and power. In the heavenly realm, the throne of God blazed with radiant light, surrounded by the celestial hosts. Angels of light, majestic and formidable, moved through the heavenly corridors, their wings shimmering with the very essence of creation. Among them were the cherubim and seraphim, powerful entities who stood closest to the divine throne, singing hymns that echoed through the heavens. But not all the heavenly beings remained stationed in the celestial realm. Some were appointed as guardians of the earth, spiritual overseers whose duty was to maintain divine order in the world below. These beings were known as the Watchers or the Sons of God. They were not ordinary angels, but celestial stewards, tasked with observing and safeguarding the first creation. Their mission was to ensure that the divine law was upheld, that balance was preserved, and that every being walked in the light of Elohim. But what was the earth like in those days? Genesis chapter 1 verse 27 speaks of a creation that seems vastly different from what we later encounter in the Garden of Eden. It tells of a humanity created in the image of God, male and female, yet there is no mention of dust or clay, no mention of the garden, or the breath of life. Some theologians propose that this first humanity was not physical but spiritual in nature. These beings were said to have been created from light, not from earth. They were not confined to flesh and bone, nor did they toil the ground as Adam would later do. Instead, they radiated divine glory, living in a state of pure spiritual essence, reflecting the image of Elohim without corruption or decay. Imagine a world where mountains glowed like polished gemstones, where rivers flowed not with water but with liquid light, where the very air shimmered with the ethereal presence of God's glory. This was the earth as it may have existed before Adam, a realm where the line between heaven and earth was thin, where the spiritual beings and celestial hosts coexisted in a state of perfect harmony. But who ruled over this first world? Some believe that the ruler was none other than Lucifer, the morning star. Described in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 12 as the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty, Lucifer was a being of incredible majesty. Adorned with precious stones that reflected divine light, He was a prince of the heavens, a shining guardian of God's glory. But was Lucifer merely a celestial servant, or was he something more? Some speculate that he was the appointed king over this first world, a ruler of spiritual beings who governed with divine authority. He walked among the stones of fire, ruling from a throne of light, his radiance a living reflection of the Creator's glory. Lucifer's role was not that of a conqueror or a tyrant, but of a spiritual overseer, a being whose primary purpose was to reflect the glory of Elohim to the spiritual inhabitants of the earth. The light he bore was not his own, but a borrowed radiance, a symbol of his divine commission. And beneath Lucifer's rule were the Watchers, the sons of God who moved freely between the heavenly and earthly realms. They were the keepers of divine law, tasked with maintaining the spiritual purity of the first world. The Watchers were powerful entities, capable of traversing realms, observing both the spiritual and earthly creations, ensuring that divine order was never disrupted. Their role was to guard the balance of creation, to keep watch over the spiritual humanity, and to report back to the heavenly council. They were the eyes and ears of Elohim, ever vigilant, ever watchful. But what exactly were they watching for? Could it be that the divine order was more fragile than it appeared? And what of the spiritual humanity, the first creation of mankind? They were not like Adam, bound to the dust of the ground. Instead, they were beings of light, ethereal and transcendent, moving freely through the spiritual realms, reflecting the divine image without the weight of mortal flesh. Could it be that they were the first inhabitants of the earth? A race destined to reign in harmony under the governance of Lucifer, the shining prince? But there was something beneath the surface of this radiant kingdom, a subtle tension that may have been growing. Was the power given to Lucifer not enough? Did he desire more? Was the throne he ruled from merely a reflection of the throne he wished to claim? These questions will lead us deeper into the next chapter, where we will uncover how the ambition of one being may have shattered this perfect world, plunging it into darkness and setting the stage for a second creation, the world of Adam. But for now we are left with the image of a world not yet tainted by sin, a kingdom of light where spiritual beings lived in harmony under the watchful eyes of celestial guardians, a world ruled by Lucifer, the morning star, the most radiant of all the heavenly hosts. Does this pre-Adamic world truly exist, or is it merely a whispered legend, a shadow of what might have been? Was it a perfect kingdom, a realm where heaven and earth coexisted in divine harmony? Or was it a fragile paradise, destined to fall under the weight of its own ambition? Leave a comment below and tell us what you think. Could such a world have existed? Was it truly a kingdom where heaven and earth lived as one, where light and glory flowed like rivers through every valley and every mountain? Let us know as we continue to uncover the secrets of the lost world before Adam. In the beginning, Lucifer was a being of unmatched brilliance. He was known as the morning star, the seal of perfection, the one who walked among the stones of fire adorned in jewels that radiated divine light. Ezekiel chapter 28, verses 12 to 17, describes him as a creature of beauty, wisdom, and power, a being who reflected the glory of God like no other. Lucifer's position was not one of servitude, but of exaltation. He was a prince among the celestial hosts, a leader among the Watchers, and some believe he was the appointed ruler of the first world. His role was to reflect the light of Elohim, to govern the spiritual inhabitants of the earth, and to ensure that divine order was upheld. But as time passed, a shadow crept into his heart. What began as admiration for his own beauty soon turned into a craving for power, a desire to rise above his appointed station. Could it be that the very light that once reflected God's glory now became a source of pride for Lucifer? He began to see himself not as a mere creation, but as a potential equal to the Creator. Isaiah chapter 14 verses 12 to 15 captures the essence of his fall. How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit enthroned on the Mount of Assembly, on the utmost heights of the sacred mountain. I will ascend above the tops of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High. Lucifer's ambition was not just to be admired, but to be worshipped. He wanted to ascend beyond the throne of God, to claim dominion over all creation, to place himself as the sovereign ruler of both heaven and earth. And in his heart the desire for power grew, consuming him like a fire that could not be quenched. But Lucifer was not alone. Ezekiel 28:16 hints at the possibility that he corrupted others. He whispered his seductive lies to other celestial beings, planting seeds of doubt and rebellion. He convinced them that they too could share in his glory, that they too could rise above the divine order. And as those seeds took root, a third of the heavenly hosts began to turn. It was a rebellion that shook the very foundations of heaven. The once perfect order of the celestial realm was now divided, and two armies formed. Those who remained loyal to Elohim, and those who followed the morning star in his quest for power. At the forefront of the loyal angels stood Archangel Michael, the Prince of Light, the commander of the heavenly armies. Michael was a being of unwavering faith, a warrior whose loyalty to God was as steadfast as the eternal light of heaven. War in heaven. The hidden history portrays him as the one who would stand against the morning star, the one who would lead the charge to defend the throne of God. And so the war began. Imagine the heavens filled with the clash of celestial beings, wings of light colliding with wings of darkness. Michael and his legions fought fiercely, their swords of flame cutting through the ranks of the fallen. But Lucifer and his followers were equally fierce, their once radiant forms now twisted with rage and rebellion. In the midst of the battle, Lucifer himself faced Michael. The morning star, who once walked among the stones of fire, now burned with a different kind of flame, the flame of pride and wrath. The battle was not just for power, but for the very soul of creation. If Lucifer won, he would seize control of both heaven and earth, establishing a kingdom built on deception and dominance. But Michael was relentless. With each strike, he echoed the will of God, declaring that the throne of Elohim would not be overthrown. And in the final clash, the Prince of Light prevailed. Lucifer and his legions, the once radiant hosts who had dared to challenge the Creator, were cast out of heaven, falling like stars plummeting into darkness. Revelation 12:7-9 recounts the moment of Lucifer's fall. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. But what became of Lucifer after his fall? Isaiah 14:15 provides the chilling answer, "But you are brought down to the grave, to the depths of the pit." The morning star, the once glorious ruler, was now a prince of darkness, his throne shattered, his kingdom in ruins, his followers scattered. He was cast down to the earth, stripped of his radiance, his name now synonymous with deception and destruction. But the consequences of Lucifer's rebellion were not limited to heaven alone. The first world, the pre-Adamic realm that he once ruled, fell into chaos and darkness, a kingdom without a king, a world without order. Genesis 1:2 describes the aftermath. Now the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. The perfect world that God had created, the kingdom of light that Lucifer once governed, was now a desolate wasteland. The rivers of light ceased to flow, the mountains no longer glowed, and the spiritual beings who once walked the earth vanished into the shadows. Lucifer's ambition had cost him everything: his throne, his followers, and his place in the heavens. But his hatred for the Creator did not die with his fall. He was now a being of darkness, a tempter, a deceiver, the adversary of all that was holy. And as he lay in the abyss, cast down and defeated, a new plan began to form in his mind, a plan to corrupt the next creation, to undermine the new world that God would soon bring forth. But that is a story for another chapter. For now, we are left with the image of a fallen prince, once the most radiant of all the heavenly hosts, now cast into darkness, his wings stripped of light, his throne reduced to ashes. And the world he once ruled, a kingdom now void and empty, awaiting its rebirth in the hands of the Creator. Lucifer's rebellion did not just disrupt the heavens, it shattered the earth he once ruled. Before the fall, the world was a radiant kingdom, a realm of light and spiritual harmony. But when Lucifer's pride led to a cosmic war, the consequences echoed beyond the celestial realm. His defeat was catastrophic, not just for him and his fallen angels, but for the very world he once governed. Genesis 1:1 declares, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Yet the very next verse paints a vastly different picture. Now the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. What could have caused such a drastic transformation between these two verses? This is where the gap theory comes into play. According to this interpretation, there was a period, perhaps a vast expanse of time, between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. During this gap, the world that Lucifer once ruled may have been destroyed, its light extinguished, its beauty reduced to chaos and desolation. The once vibrant kingdom became a formless, empty wasteland submerged in darkness. But why would God allow such destruction? Could it be that Lucifer's rebellion was so violent, so cataclysmic, that it tore the very fabric of creation? Ezekiel 28:18 alludes to Lucifer's actions. "By your many sins and dishonest trade, you have desecrated your sanctuaries. So I made a fire come out from you, and it consumed you." In this interpretation, the fire that consumed Lucifer's sanctuaries also consumed the earth, leaving it in ruins. The rivers of light dried up, the mountains no longer glowed. The spiritual beings who once populated the world vanished into darkness, their kingdom now a shadow of its former glory. But God did not abandon the earth to chaos. Rather than creating a new world from nothing, he chose to restore the old one. Genesis 1:3 marks the first step in this restoration. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. This was not the creation of light itself, but the reintroduction of light to a world engulfed in darkness. Step by step, God reconstructed the earth, separating light from darkness, waters from land, and once again preparing the ground for life. Yet this time, rather than creating spiritual beings of light, he formed a new kind of creation, Adam, a being molded from the dust of the ground, a being who would now bear the image of God in a physical form. But what happened to the ruins of the old world? Did the remnants of Lucifer's kingdom remain buried beneath the newly formed earth? Was the darkness that once covered the world merely hidden, waiting to resurface? The fall of Lucifer may have shattered his kingdom, but the consequences of his rebellion were far from over. The gap theory suggests that the destruction of the first world left the earth in a state of chaos and void. Yet, the darkness that covered the earth in Genesis 1:2 was not merely the absence of light, it was the lingering shadow of a kingdom that refused to die. Lucifer, now stripped of his glory and cast down to the depths, became the prince of darkness, but he was not alone. His followers, the fallen angels who once ruled alongside him, now roamed the earth as spiritual outcasts. Their kingdom was lost, but their thirst for power remained. And so, they sought to reclaim what had been taken from them. In Genesis 6:4, we read of the Nephilim, giants, mighty men of old, men of renown. These were not ordinary men, but offspring of the Watchers, those celestial beings who once walked the earth in the first world. After the destruction, these Watchers defied their divine order. They descended once more to the earth, not to serve as guardians, but to indulge in forbidden desires. They took the daughters of men as wives, producing offspring that were neither fully human nor fully divine, the Nephilim. The Nephilim were beings of immense strength and terrifying power. They were described as giants towering over ordinary men. Goliath, the giant who challenged the armies of Israel, was one of their descendants. 1 Samuel 17:4 tells us that Goliath stood over 9 feet tall, a monstrous warrior bred for war. But Goliath was not an isolated phenomenon. He was the product of a lineage that stretched back to the first world, a lineage corrupted by the fallen ones. The presence of the Nephilim on the earth was a direct consequence of the rebellion in the first world. Though the earth was restored and Adam was created, the spiritual corruption from the ancient kingdom remained embedded in the fabric of creation. The fallen watchers continued to roam the earth, seeking to corrupt the new creation, to stain the divine order with their unholy offspring. But the influence of the first world did not end with the Nephilim. Lucifer, now known as Satan, still held sway over the spiritual realm. Though he was cast down, his ambition remained unbroken. He would not rule as a prince of light, but he would rule as the prince of darkness. And so, he entered the Garden of Eden, his eyes fixed on the newly created humanity. Satan's temptation of Eve in Genesis 3 was not a random act of deceit. It was a calculated strike against the new world, a continuation of the rebellion that had begun in the first world. The serpent that whispered to Eve was not merely a cunning creature, it was Lucifer himself, now a fallen being, a prince without a kingdom, seeking to corrupt what God had restored. When Eve took the forbidden fruit, the consequences were immediate and devastating. Sin entered the new world and death followed, but this was not the first fall. It was a continuation of the original rebellion. The spiritual corruption that began with Lucifer had now infected humanity, spreading like a dark shadow over the earth. And so, the influence of the first world persisted. The Watchers continued to roam the earth, corrupting humanity through forbidden unions. The Nephilim, giants of old, became symbols of divine defiance, towering reminders that the first world was not entirely gone. And Satan, once the morning star, now prowled the earth like a lion, seeking whom he might devour. The echoes of the first world still reverberated through the earth, and the darkness that once engulfed the world had not been fully extinguished. It lingered in the hearts of fallen beings, in the bloodlines of the Nephilim, in the whispers of the serpent in Eden. The world that God recreated for Adam was meant to be a place of order and light, but the shadows of the first world refused to fade away. And as the new world grew, so too did the influence of the fallen. The stage was set for a new conflict, a battle not just between flesh and blood, but between the spiritual remnants of the first world and the newly created humanity. The war that began in heaven was far from over. It had only just begun. The echoes of the first world may seem distant, a shadowy past buried beneath the surface of creation, but the truth is, the consequences of that ancient rebellion still linger in our world today. The darkness that once consumed Lucifer and the Watchers continues to manifest in the hearts of men, and the sins that led to the destruction of the pre-Adamic world remain powerful forces at work in the present. First, we must confront the sin that started it all: pride. Lucifer, the morning star, was once the seal of perfection, the epitome of beauty and wisdom. Yet, it was his pride that became his undoing. He looked upon his own glory and began to believe that he could ascend above the throne of God. In his heart he said, "I will be like the Most High." Isaiah 14:14. Today, pride still serves as the root of all sin. How often do we see it in ourselves and in those around us? The desire for power, the thirst for recognition, the insatiable need to be seen as greater than we are, these are the very seeds that led to Lucifer's downfall. And just as his pride corrupted his heart and led to his ruin, so too does pride corrupt and destroy those who refuse to humble themselves before God. But Lucifer's pride did not end with him. The serpent that tempted Eve in Eden was not merely a cunning creature, but Satan himself, a fallen prince who now sought to corrupt the new creation. He whispered lies to Eve, convincing her that by eating the forbidden fruit, she could become like God, knowing good and evil. In that moment, Eve fell prey to temptation, believing that the knowledge of good and evil would elevate her to a godlike status. She was deceived, not because she was unintelligent, but because she allowed herself to believe a lie that appealed to her desire for power. And how often do we find ourselves in the same position? How often do we rationalize sinful actions, convincing ourselves that we are justified, that we deserve more, that we can handle the consequences? The serpent's whisper still echoes in our world, urging us to take what is forbidden, to grasp for more than what God has ordained for us. But there was another sin that reverberates from the first world into the present, the sin of unholy unions. The Watchers, once guardians of the earth, defied their divine order by mingling with the daughters of men. They abandoned their heavenly post, forsaking their sacred duty to indulge in earthly desires. Their actions led to the birth of the Nephilim, giants who became symbols of corruption and violence. These hybrid beings were not just physically imposing, they were spiritually tainted, a manifestation of the consequences of crossing divine boundaries. The Watcher's sin was not just a violation of divine law, it was an act of rebellion that opened a door to darkness that would haunt the earth for generations. In today's world, the temptation to enter into unholy alliances is ever present. We are surrounded by influences that draw us away from our divine purpose, that entice us to compromise our values for fleeting pleasure, power, or gain. The story of the Watchers serves as a stern warning. When we align ourselves with what is not of God, we invite destruction upon ourselves and those around us. Yet, despite the darkness that lingers, there is a message of hope and restoration woven throughout the narrative. Even after the first world was destroyed, even after the rebellion of Lucifer and the corruption of the Watchers, God did not abandon creation. He did not leave the world in darkness and void. Instead, he said, "Let there be light." Genesis 1:3. The very act of creation was an act of restoration, a divine declaration that darkness will not have the final say. And this pattern of restoration continues throughout Scripture. God takes what is broken and makes it whole. He took the chaos of the first world and brought forth order. He took the dust of the ground and formed Adam. And when Adam fell, God initiated the plan of redemption through Jesus Christ, the second Adam, who would crush the serpent's head and restore what was lost. This is the message for us today. No matter how great the darkness, God's light is greater. No matter how deeply we have fallen, His hand is still outstretched to lift us up. Pride can be overcome by humility. Temptation can be resisted through truth. And unholy alliances can be severed through repentance. The destruction of the first world serves as a stark reminder that sin has consequences, that darkness is real, and that rebellion against God leads to ruin. But it also reminds us that God is a God of restoration, a creator who takes what is formless and void and speaks life into it once more. We live in a world where the shadows of the first world still linger, where the temptations that ensnared Lucifer and the Watchers still seek to ensnare us. But we also live in a world where the light of Christ still shines, where the voice that once said, "Let there be light," still speaks life and hope into our darkest moments. And as we look to the past, to the ancient world before Adam, we are reminded that while the first kingdom may have fallen, the kingdom of God will endure forever. And that is a truth we can hold on to, even as the shadows of the first world continue to echo through the present. The ancient world before Adam may have been lost to time, but its echoes still reverberate through the present. The pride of Lucifer, the temptation in Eden, the unholy unions of the Watchers, all of these were not merely ancient events, but powerful warnings for us today. They remind us that the spiritual war that began in the heavens is still unfolding, that the darkness that once engulfed the first world still seeks to consume us, and that the battle between light and darkness is far from over. But the good news is that God's light continues to shine, Just as he brought order out of chaos, light out of darkness, and life out of emptiness, he is still in the business of restoration. Though the first world fell, the world of Adam rose, and though sin entered through one man, redemption was offered through another, Jesus Christ, the second Adam. Today we stand between two worlds, the world that was destroyed and the world that is yet to come. The choice before us is the same as it was in Eden. Whom will we serve? Will we follow the path of Lucifer, seeking power and glory for ourselves? Or will we walk the path of humility, surrendering to the will of the Creator? Thank you for joining us on this journey through the lost world before Adam. If this video opened your eyes to new revelations, share your thoughts in the comments below. What stood out to you the most? The rise and fall of Lucifer? The haunting legacy of the Nephilim? Or the hope of restoration that still shines in the midst of darkness? And if you want to continue exploring these hidden truths and untold stories, subscribe to Sacred Wisdom and join us as we uncover the mysteries of the Bible, one chapter at a time. Until next time, may the light of God guide your path, and may you walk in the truth that no darkness can overcome.